Thank you. This meeting of the Richmond Rent Board is being called to order at 5:01 p.m.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining the April 20th, 2022 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few reminders. Members of the public were asked to submit requests to speak on any item on the agenda, including their name, phone number, and item for which they wish to make a public comment to Cynthia_Shaw at ci.richmond.ca.us by 3 p.m. today, as described on the first page of the agenda. If you wish to make a comment on any item on the agenda and have not emailed me your request, you must do so in accordance with the first page of the agenda before the item is called. Requests received via email during the meeting and after the deadline to submit comments will be accommodated as reasonably possible and will be limited to a maximum of 1 to 2 minutes, depending on the number of commenters, as more fully described in the Rent Board meeting agenda procedures. This meeting is being conducted as a Zoom webinar. Members of the public are considered as attendees and will be muted for the duration of the meeting unless called upon during public comment and unmuted by the webinar host. The city cannot guarantee that its network and/or the site will be uninterrupted. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and all statements made during this meeting will be on the public record. Okay, the next item on the agenda is pledge to the flag. Please join me in pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to
the flag,
United States
of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda is roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an audible roll call from Rent Board members and staff? Board Member Connor.
Present.
Board Member Johnson.
Present.
Board Member Vasilas.
Present.
Vice Chair Mashek.
Present.
Chair Finley.
present.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor.
Present.
He's here. Deputy Director Fred Tran.
Here.
And General Counsel Charles Oshanuga.
Here.
For the record, all board members and staff are present. The next item on the agenda is statement of conflict of interest. Are there any? Okay. Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Staff, any changes? Board members, any changes?
No changes on staff level.
Thank you.
Okay, hearing none. The next item on the agenda is public forum. Okay, just give me a moment. Let me stop sharing my screen. And let's see if the attendees are here. All right. Can you see the timer, you guys?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. I'm just making sure that the attendees are here. Okay, they're here. Okay. I'm gonna go over the public forum rules. Tonight we have a total of 5 public speakers. Each speaker shall be allowed up to 2 minutes to address the board. When your name is called, please wait until the webinar host lets you know that you have been unmuted. For the record, please state your name and your residence is optional. Please terminate your address to the board when your time expires. We ask that you keep your comments respectful and appropriate. You will be muted when your time expires. The first speaker is Jimmy Smith, and let me try to find Mr. Smith. I have a caller here, but I'm not sure if this is the person. I don't see him. Oh, right, that might be him. Hold on. Is this Jimmy Smith?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Smith, you could go ahead.
Okay, great. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ray Smith, and I go by Jimmy Smith. And this evening, I'm bringing before the board a package I submitted, the maximum net operating income package. This package was submitted. Just as COVID was starting to affect the local businesses and tenants in the area, in which ran into a period of time where everything was shut down by the federal, state, and local governments, to where this package was kind of shelved at the time. Just like many court cases, major surgeries, things of that nature due to COVID, things of that nature. So as we proceeded moving forward, I resubmitted the package in January 2022 to have it reviewed for maximum net operating income that we put into a building in Point Richmond, which is a 20-unit apartment building. We did major renovations of the new balconies, earthquake structural repairs, retrofitting, to the tune of about $456,000. So I submitted the package in January 2022, and then unfortunately it was returned back to me, being that staff members seem to need some type of direction from you, the board, on how to deal with a older package, being that it was repairs that were expenses that were made in 2019 and 2020. And so I'm reaching out to you, the board, to see if we could get some guidance on how we can move forward in having this significant amount of capital that was spent looked into, of how we could get a return of investment on this project.
Your time has expired. The next speaker is Cordell Hindler. Cordell, are you allowed? You hear me? Cordell, you have been unmuted. Cordell, can you hear me? Okay, I don't know if he's having some, we could come back to him. Cordell? Cordell, can you hear me? Okay, well, we're going to move on, and then hopefully he'll come back. Okay, so the next speaker is we received a request for accommodations from a community member named Karen. And I am reading this email because it was a request for accommodation. My name is Karen. I live at Heritage Park Senior Apartments in Richmond. I would like to find out what can be done as tenants in an apartment complex with a management that doesn't seem to care about the health, safety, or lives of their elderly tenants, many with health and disability issues. We have had ongoing and increasing numbers of serious problems since I moved here over 10 years ago. Currently, we are having malfunctioning fire alarms going off day and night for 6 weeks now, scaring the living daylights out of people and placing vulnerable tenants at risk of having cardiac events or strokes. Other tenants have become increasingly complacent and non-responsive to the many false alarms, putting their lives in danger in the event of an actual fire. There are some tenants who are not able to leave their units without assistance due to illness or disability. Because we are not being kept informed as to what is going on or when the alarms might be triggered due to being worked on, these tenants are being put in a particularly dangerous and terrifying position, not knowing when or if they need to get help in order to evacuate. Other tenants are left to wait outside in the cold and not at night waiting for someone to turn off the alarms. One tenant was forced to leave their apartment to sit in their car in a parking lot and also had to sleep in their car overnight because of the pain caused by the alarms and the probability of it causing a cardiac event. Management calls this problem simply an annoyance. This is unacceptable. It goes way beyond violating the right of quiet enjoyment of our homes. It's made our homes uninhabitable and a danger to live in. As seniors, we deserve more than being treated like this. And that was by Karen. The next speaker is Ilana Clark. Okay, I'm gonna see if she's on. And then if we wanna go, would you like for me to see if Cordell's back on chair and let him speak?
Yes, fine.
Okay, let me see if he's here. Cordell?
Right here.
Oh, okay, he's there. Okay, we hear you now. Go ahead.
So good evening, Chair Finley, board members. My name is Cordell Handler and I'm a Richmond resident. So on the consent calendar, I do approve F1 through F5. And as far as F6 goes, let me reiterate my statement from last month. The reason that I'm opposing this continue the meetings virtually is because I have talked with other cities in West County, and they have been doing hybrid meetings. And so I'm bringing this forward again to the rent board, to consider doing that format, because that way the public can also call in too, just like at city council meetings. So I'm asking that the rent board, looking to see if a hybrid model is in the future. That's one. And then number two is an invitation for you all. So you are cordially invited to attend the Richmond Rotary Club weekly meeting on May 6th at 12:30 p.m. at the Richmond Country Club. Tickets are only $25 for lunch. And our speaker for that one, we will have the city manager's office to provide an overview on economic development initiatives. So put it on your calendar, May 6th, 12:30 at the Richmond Country Club. So that's my invitation, and that's it.
Thank you. The next this next speaker. Oops. The next speaker is Ilana Clark. I'm going to unmute. I have a few callers on the line, but I don't know who they belong to. They don't match with the numbers I have, so I'm going to unmute them to see if it's her. Ilana, is this you? Is this Ilana Clark? Okay, that's not her. Okay, I don't see, let me ask another number. Is this Miss Clark? Okay, that's not her either. Okay, she's not present at this time. I don't see another caller that can be her. If she shows up, Chair, would you like for me to allow her to speak? She's actually on to speak at during other items as well. Okay.
If she wishes to use this time, absolutely. We'll give her that same courtesy that we gave to Mr. Hindler.
Okay, yeah, I don't see her on the line. It doesn't match a number that I have. Okay, and then we have one more speaker, Elaine Dawkins, and let me see if I can find her. Okay, let's see. I don't see Elaine either. So I guess that was the last speaker. All right, and if they show up, I will ask, if they show up and I see them, I will let you know. Chair, Board Member Johnson has her hand up.
Yes, I was just wondering if there's any way anyone can follow up with, I think her name was Karen, because it doesn't seem fair to just leave her concerns unanswered.
Yeah, so Board Member Johnson, I've been in communication with Karen regularly. And I will follow up on this most recent issue. And I actually have been speaking with management at Heritage Park about the fire alarm issue. And apparently it has been resolved recently within the last week or so. But they do have some ongoing issues from what I understand.
Yeah, I think I've been hearing about them for a while.
Yes.
And Board Member Vasilis has his hand raised.
Yeah, I was just wondering if any of the staff could elaborate on Jimmy Smith's comment, if you're allowed to.
I can certainly do that. So Mr. Smith filed a maintenance of net operating income petition, which is the fair return petition. And he did work in 2020 and 2019. Those are both years that do not count as the current year. The current year right now is 2021. So when you are doing an MNOI analysis, you look at the base year, which is 2015, and that's the year prior to rent regulation taking effect. So it's presumed that you received a fair return during that year. So you compare that year with the current year, which is the preceding calendar year to this year, just as with taxes, and you do a comparison of the net operating income in both of those years to see whether or not the owners have kept up with the cost of living. So his concern is that, and his, I don't want to speak for him, but my understanding is that his concern is that due to the pandemic, he was unable to file in 2021 for the year 2020. And as a result, is unable to count those expenses in his MNOI analysis. So that is his concern. We wanted to bring it to the board, to the board's attention, and point out that he was impacted by the pandemic and therefore was unable to file during the time period which he would have otherwise qualified to include those expenses.
Can we talk more offline maybe about it?
Certainly.
Right.
Thanks.
I'll follow up. Thank you.
Okay.
That was the last speaker. I still do not see the other speakers who requested, so we can move on to the next item. The next item.
I do want to be clear, Cynthia, that
Yes.
we're willing to hear people during this time frame, but I'm not willing to, once we start the rest of the agenda, we will continue to move forward. We won't be interrupting that unless they're signed up to speak on an agenda item.
Yes, I understand.
Okay.
The only person that signed up to speak on another agenda item is Ms. Alana Clark. I don't see
Fine.
her number. They're supposed to send their number to me so I can recognize who they are when I'm looking at them, and I don't see it. So it's just a little, and that's why I was just clicking on everyone just to see who it was.
Okay.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is to approve the consent calendar.
Okay. Would anyone make a motion, please, about accepting the consent calendar?
I move that we accept the consent calendar.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mishak. May I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. May we have a vote?
Yes, Board Member Connor,
Yes.
Board Member Johnson,
Yes.
Board Member Vasilis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Mishek,
Yes.
and Chair Finley.
Yes.
Motion passes to approve the consent calendar unanimously.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is item G1. Under regulations, item G1, let me stop share. Hold on one second. So Fred. Item G1 is to adopt Regulation 610, establishing the 2022 annual general adjustment in the amount of 5.2% for tenancies commencing prior to September 1st, 2021. We have one speaker on this item.
And Fred, can you change the view to just a full screen, please? Thank you. Do we want to hear the speaker first, or are we?
No, may we
presentation?
have staff report, please, and then we'll hear the speakers.
Thank you. Chair Finley and members of the Rent Board, Nicholas Traylor, Executive Director. I'm here to present the 2022 Annual General Adjustment. And we can move to the next slide. So I need to quickly move my video thing down. Okay, section 11.100.070B of the Fair Rent, Just Cause for Eviction and Homeowner Protection Ordinance, also known as the Rent Ordinance, requires that no later than June 30th of each year, the board announce the percentage by which rent for eligible rental units will be generally adjusted effective September 1st of that year. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of background. The Rent Board is required to announce the percentage by which rent for eligible units will be generally adjusted effective September 1st of that particular year. This rent adjustment increase is referred to the Annual General Adjustment, or AGA. The AGA reflects 100% of the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers measured for the San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose region, also known as the CPI. Some people refer to it as cost of living. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes on a quarterly basis the CPI change in any given 12-month period. For the purposes of this regulation, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the CPI change for the annual period beginning February 1st, 2021 and ending February 2022 was 5.2%. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about the proposed regulation 609. To maintain compliance with the rent ordinance, staff members are proposing adoption of regulation 609, which would announce the 2022 AGA at 5.2%, would authorize landlords who are in compliance with the rent ordinance and other applicable regulations to increase rents by no more than 5.2% for tenancies that began prior to September 1st of 2021. It would require a valid notice of rent increase be served on tenants prior to increasing the rent by the AGA, and it would also reaffirm the following noticing obligations. Prior to increasing rents, landlords must serve tenants with a written notice of rent increase in a manner consistent with Civil Code Section 827. The landlords must also serve to the rent board and rent program a copy of the rent increase notice that was served on the tenant, and that must be done within 10 business days. Landlords also must file a copy of a proof of service of the rent increase with the rent board. Next slide, please. Now, as board members know, we have a banking regulation that limits how many years of annual general adjustments, what percentage of annual general adjustments may be taken in any one given year. So under the banking regulation, in the event that a current year's annual general adjustment exceeds 5%, a landlord may not apply any deferred annual general adjustment increases until the next annual general adjustment increase is less than 5%. Next slide, please. So staff members will prepare a drafted template for rent increase and maximum allowable rent calculator for landlords to use based on the new 2022 annual general adjustments. And these forms will be posted on the rent increase page that's on the rent program website. We will also announce the 2022 AGA through the rent program's listserv and on social media accounts. Next slide. So the recommended action for the board tonight is adoption of regulation 609, 608, and 609, establishing the 2022 annual general adjustment in the amount of 5.2 for tenancies commencing prior to September 1st, 2021. And with that, board has any questions, we're happy to answer.
Any questions from board members for Mr. Traylor? All righty. In that case, may we hear from the public speakers?
Yes, I'm trying
Oh,
to.
I'm sorry. Did I miss?
It looks like a couple of board members have their hands up.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, that wasn't showing on my screen. My apologies.
I don't know
all
which one
I'm-
went up first.
Yeah, because all I'm getting is the
Well,
report.
what we have board member Johnson has her hand up, as well as board member Vasilis. I'm not sure which person went first.
All right. Well, let's go with board member Johnson first, and then we'll hear from Mr. Vasilis.
Okay.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. Last year, the increase, was it 1.2% or was it somewhere around 1% last year?
It was 1.6%.
Okay, so I'm just curious why it went from 1.6 and now it's 5.2. That's a huge increase. And people are still trying to get caught up probably on their back rent from still being in a pandemic. And with all the prices going up, gas prices and grocery prices, it just doesn't seem fair to have such a, number one, to have an increase and to have such a big increase from last year.
Yeah, so the annual general adjustment is tied to the consumer price index, which is an inflationary rate for the Bay Area. And as I believe all of you know, inflation has gone up significantly over the last 6 to 12 months. As a result, the annual general adjustment has gone up as well, reflecting that increase in inflation. And so sorry, go ahead.
Everything's going up except wages.
Yes, I understand. The board and the rent program are required to adhere to the requirements of the rent ordinance, and the rent ordinance ties the annual general adjustment to the consumer price index or inflation. So there's always that we all know that there's always a possibility that inflation can swing. Sometimes it's been many decades since it's been this high. I think the last time it was this high was back in the 1980s. So it's nothing we can really do. I mean, this is hard coded into the actual law, into the rent ordinance.
Mr. Traylor, may I just make a quick comment in addition to the fact that we have no ability at all to make any change in this publishing of the AGI, but the other part of that equation is that although it must be published, there is no requirement that the landlords raise their rent that much, or if they choose not to, they can not raise it at all. But they do have the right to do that. And when you start looking at the fact that the year before was only 1.6%, it doesn't look quite so awful. But again, that's something that actual decision to raise or not raise is made by the landlord.
That is correct. Landlords can always raise the rent up to the annual general adjustment, but they can always do it less as well. And it's also important to bear in mind that the rent board put in place a banking limitation to prevent rent shock. So the 5% rule is similar to the rent shock rule that applies to affordable housing. So the idea is that unlike other jurisdictions, for example, in Oakland, the limit is actually 10%. It can be, the annual general adjustment of up to 5 plus, plus another 5. So that's just a little context, but yes, landlords can certainly raise the rent less than the annual general adjustment if they choose to do so.
Okay.
Mr. Vasilis, did you have a question, sir?
Yeah, I did. I was just hoping you could go over Regulation 602C a little bit more. So I just feel that banking's super important because with banking, a landlord isn't forced to raise every year to keep up. They can push it off for a long time, then kind of recover it, whenever the time is needed. But the one thing I thought that we had in our banking regulation, I thought it was 5% plus CPI was the cap. So 602C seems a little weird because it kind of is counterintuitive to that.
So I believe the banking limitation was put in place around the same time that the affordable housing rent cap was also put in place. And I think that might have been why the board elected to put that policy in place.
Well, so it's just like, for instance, if CPI was 4.9, then that would be an allowable 9.9%. But if CPI is 5.1, which is higher, it's an allowable 5.1%. Is that,
I think
right?
If it hits 5%, then the most you can raise it is 5%. Once you get up to 5, then you have to wait until it gets below 5 to be able to take any deferred annual general adjustments.
But if it is 4, then you can do 4 plus 5, and then it would be 9.
That's correct.
Okay. So, I mean, I would just think, just reading it, that it would make sense because I know that the rent cap amount, I think at the state level is 10%. So obviously, if you're doing 5% plus CPI and you're at 5.2, then you're 0.2 over that limit, and then you'd have to defer that 0.2 to a time in which it's less than 5. But the way this is written, it just kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense to keep in line with the banking regulation. Just wanted to point that out.
If I can just make a comment, just 2 comments. One, the PowerPoint. So when you take a vote, whenever that happens, the published agenda refers to regulation 610. That's the regulation being considered. I know the PowerPoint says 608, but please keep in mind it's actually 610 that you're moving to approve. And board member Vasilis, just a little bit of clarity. At the time that the board adopted regulation 602, it has 6 subparts. I think A through whatever D, maybe 5 subparts. B is the subpart you're referring to, the one with the 5% plus CPI, and C is also the one you're referring to. That's in a year that it exceeds 5%, you can't take any deferred banking increases. And it was adopted during the same meeting, which means that the board considered a limit on, the board adopted C to limit the impact of B in a year in which inflation is too high. So yes, B totally is effective. However, in a given year where the CPI exceeds the 5%, we're pretty much limiting B. We're saying B is not applying anymore. C is going to apply. And C says that in that year, you can only take whatever that AGA is. So if the AGA is 7%, you can take 7%, but you can't take any deferred AGAs.
Oh, okay.
So in this particular year, a landlord would be entitled to take 5.2% if they chose to.
Last year, they could take 6.6%.
Right, if they had enough deferred banks. In fact, they could take up to 10% last year, or sorry, they could
I'm just saying, if you did the 5% plus CPI, it would be 6.6, and now it's 5.2.
Yes, yes, but it's not a, B is a banking limitation, and C is a banking prohibition. like, you're limited in how you use your banking in B, and in C is when these conditions exist, you can't even use your banking. You only can use the AGA. I think maybe perhaps that's a way to think about it.
All right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I get that part. It just seems a little weird, but I mean, the reason I brought it up is because it's in the packet. It talked about community outreach regarding this very thing, right? Education on the banking. So I think it'd be nice to, maybe I'll ask you guys offline about this as well. Thank you.
Chair
Okay.
Finley, board member Connor has her hand up.
All right, Ms. Connor?
I was really just going to piggyback off of board member Vasilas's comment about the confusion between O2, B, and C. And that what is compounding the problem further is how do you recapture those served or those that aren't passed on 3 or 4 years down the road. It seems like we may want to consider how to make it more simple for the property owner to know what they can do and what they can't do. And my thought was simply, if you have an owner who sells their property and they have AGAs that haven't been taken, how simple is it for them to figure out what was left on the table? So it may be something for us to put on a different agenda, put on an agenda for a different meeting.
Yeah, it would definitely have to be on an agenda item published so that people will know that we're discussing that. Whereas this one is pretty clear cut, even with the confusion of the numbers, that this is the announcement of the annual general adjustment. So, but I'm glad that you've brought these issues up, because perhaps another agenda item at a later date, we can go into it as a whole to see if we want to change anything. Now, does any other member of the board wish to make a comment?
The public speaker is on the line. I see her.
Very good. Then let's go to the public speaker.
Okay. Like I mentioned earlier, we only have one public speaker. The speaker shall be allowed up to 2 minutes to address the board on this item. When your name is called, please wait until the webinar host lets you know that you have been unmuted. You will be muted for the duration. You'll be muted when your time expires. Okay, Alana Clark. I'm going to start the timer. Go ahead.
So I have a quick thing and then a not so quick thing. First, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't really understand, particularly in a year when the CPI has been less than 5% every year so far, except this year, why it's even up for a vote. This is codified in Measure L. It's already been voted on by the people. To take it one step further, Nick and Charles, please think about if all your board members voted no, then you'd be in a position of going against Measure L or against your own board. I don't think that's a tenable position, and you don't want to put yourself in that position. I think the board members should abstain. This is what it is. It's already been voted on. It shouldn't even be on the agenda as something to vote on. It should be in the announcements. Second, for this 5% or 5.2% CPI, my understanding and what I have been educated about, and I think I'm better educated than a lot of housing providers in this area, is that the max is CPI plus 5% if there are banked up to 5%, total not to exceed the state limit of 10% per year, and any remainder, if it exists, would be banked for future years. So is that something you guys are questioning, or is that not the case? Because if it's not the case, then I would like to be educated further on this point. It does not seem clear to me if that's not it. Thank you.
That was the last speaker and only speaker.
Okay. Now, I'm going to bring this back to the board. Now that we've heard the speaker, does anybody else want to make any other kind of a comment or question on this issue? Hearing none or seeing none, am I correct? I don't have it on my screen, so do
I
any,
don't
are the board?
see any hands raised.
Okay, all righty. In that case, may we have a motion?
Chair Finley, if I could just make one comment. I
Of
think would
course.
be, thank you. I think it would be helpful for any of the viewers today or any of the speakers who spoke today who are confused by the banking to please contact the rent program prior to seeking a rent increase. There's nothing in our regulation that ties the banking to state limitations. So if that's your understanding, please contact the rent program to understand how it's going to work in this given year or how it just works generally. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oceanuga.
Chair Finley, Board Member Fasilos has his hand raised.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Board Member Fasilos, he has his hand raised.
Mr. Vasilis.
Yeah, just a quick question. Is there a copy of the video of that meeting in which 602 was voted on that could be sent to myself or anyone else?
It was a recording. Yes, it is. There is a recording, and that can be
Online.
sent online.
Online?
And we can send you the link.
Okay, that'd be great.
But for the public too, the public might want to know where to locate it. And it's on the website. If there's a tab that says rent board, and you can just scroll all the way down on that agenda item. If you look at the actual regulation, the regulation has the date that it was adopted. So you just cross-reference that date with the agenda item.
It's
and
2018.
You can
okay.
find it.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you. I am waiting for a motion regarding this agenda item. All right, in that case, I will make the motion that we adopt Regulation 610, establishing the 2022 annual general adjustment in the amount of 5.2% for tenancies commencing prior to September 1st, 2021.
Can we get a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you. May we have a vote?
Yes. Board Member Connor. Board Member Connor?
I can hear you. I'm thinking.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Board Member Johnson?
I'm going to vote no on principle.
Okay. Board Member Vasilas?
Yes.
Vice Chair Mashek?
Yes.
Chair Finley?
Yes.
Motion passes to adopt Regulation 610 with Board Member Johnson voting no. Passes.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is item H1. Under study and action session, item H1 is to receive an updated fiscal year 2022 through 23 rent program operating budget, discuss and provide direction to staff. There is one speaker on this item.
May we have the staff report, please?
Deputy Director Tran is going to be doing this presentation.
Are you able to see the full screen? Sorry.
There we go.
I believe that we have it now.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Good evening, Chair Finley and members of the Rent Board. I'm Fred Tran, the Deputy Director. The item before you is an update of the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget and rental housing fee. During the March and February regular Rent Board meetings, program staff presented budget options to the board with ongoing updates. In February, the staff was directed to return with a proposed budget and fee study for option B for consideration. Option B included funding for a new database system and a modest staff salary adjustment. At the time, the proposed rental housing fees were $228 for fully covered rental units and $129 for partially covered rental units. Staff met with the budget analysts from the finance department the following day after the February board meeting to receive the fringe benefits percentage and the citywide cost pool allocations. The finance department informed the program to expect a significant increase in cost pool allocations and workers' compensations insurance. A new methodology had been adopted by the city, which resulted in a 267% increase in cost pool allocations and a 66% increase for workers' compensation insurance. Staff requested further details and assumptions used for the new methodology from the Human Resources and Finance Department. Rental housing fees would increase to $275 for fully covered rental units and $155 for partially covered rental units if this methodology was applied to the budget. The new methodology used by the city must align to Governmental Code 50076, which prohibits using programs' regulatory fee in such a way that it can constitute a tax. Rent program staff is engaged in discussions with the city manager's office, city attorney, finance, and human resource department to address the new methodology for allocating the cost pool for general liability and workers' compensation to align with Government Code 50076. It established during the meeting on April 6th to jointly hire a consultant to review and analyze the methodology to assure that allocation aligns with Government Code 50076. The consultant would also determine the appropriateness of the future cost pool allocation methods. It was recommended that a placeholder be used for the cost pool allocations that require further research and review. For general liability insurance, program applied an escalating factor of 3.2% for an inflationary rate as of June 2021. This is consistent with the Human Resource Department report that was provided to the program. Rent program staff reviewed the NBS cost allocation plan provided by the finance department to calculate the admin charges for the city cost pool. After further review, the source cost data from the report requires further research with the consultants to validate if the 20 allocable costs are appropriate to be charged to the rent program. The report is using 17 full-time staff instead of the actual 10 staff that has been employed by the program during 2019-2020 fiscal year. The other source cost data sets will be reviewed with the consultants, and a meeting is being coordinated with the consultants in the finance department as well as city managers. Staff is also reviewing if other charges such as equipment services, fleet services, non-departmental, city manager's office, city attorney's office, and human resources are applicable to be charged to the program. During the second week of April, the city has updated the fringe benefits for the program within the muni system. The line items amounts are continuing to be verified by the finance and human resource departments for the rates. These costs consist of healthcare insurance, retirement contributions, payroll taxes, and other employee-related benefits. The increase results in the total fringe benefits, which has over $259,000, nearly 35% from prior years. This would increase the housing fees to $264 for fully covered units and $149 for partially covered rental units. Rent program staff request an explanation and documentation regarding the increase in fringe benefits. Staff is currently still awaiting the final rates for the fringe benefits. Currently, there are two scenarios for the budget. One is to increase the fringe benefits to the current amount budgeted by the finance department, which constitutes 78% of total salaries, or maintaining the 62% level that was used in prior years. Rent program staff has recommended to fund a new database of $100,000 in costs to the board during the February meeting. If the board opts to remove the line item, it will result in a reduction in fees of approximately $9 for fully covered units and $5 for partially covered rental units. Staff recommend maintaining a modest increase in staff salaries. Removing this line item would result in a fee decrease by approximately $2 for fully covered rental units and $1 for partially covered rental units. The COVID-19 pandemic has seriously impacted the ability of the program to recruit and maintain sufficient staffing levels and the corresponding services. The impact of not sustaining the increase may reduce retention and harm the stability of the program. Staff recommends that an adopted budget should include an additional $20,000 to hire a cost allocation consultant to reconcile and assist with determining future cost allocation charges, which assures that the allocation will align with government code 50076. In front of you are the two scenarios with the database included. Both have the reclassified of an assistant administrative analyst to a senior administrative analyst, increase of staff salaries for automatic step increases and cost of living, the $20,000 increase for consultants for the allocation, the $100,000 for the database. The cost pool allocation would be adjusted per prior meetings. The first scenario using the 78% total salaries to calculate the fringe benefits. This would result in a total budget of approximately $3.6 million in fees for fully covered units and $149 in fees for partially covered units. The second scenario is using prior year's 62% of total current salaries for calculating the fringe benefits. This results in a total budget of approximately $3.3 million, and the fees for covered units would be approximately $248, and the fees for partially covered units would be $139. The second scenario, which would be without the database, which is approximately $100,000. The first scenario is using the 78% for total salaries to calculate the fringe benefits. This results in approximately a $3.5 million in program budget, and fees for fully covered units would be $250 per unit for fully covered and $145 for partially covered units. The second scenario is using prior year's 62% of total current salaries to calculate the fringe benefits. The result would be a total of $3.2 million in budget, and the fees for fully covered units would be $239 for fully covered and $139 for partially covered units. Currently, the detailed budget with every line item is still being developed, and we are still coordinating to meet with consultants and all of the city departments. The next steps and recommended action is to receive an update of the budget and fee studies and direct staff regarding the budget options in consideration. 1, interim solution of using last year's fiscal year's cost pool numbers adjusted for inflation and additional research. 2, budgeting for a consultant to assist with the cost pool methodology analysis to align with Government Code 50076. 3, in consideration for a probable significant increase in fringe benefits for the fiscal year of 2022-2023, which is approximately 78% of the total salaries. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions from the board? And Cynthia, will you coordinate this, please? Since
Yes, I
again, I
will.
don't have
I
the
will.
information.
I will. I don't see any hands yet. Okay, Ms. Connor. She has her hand up.
Ms. Connor?
Thank you. There are a couple things I'm concerned with. I'm still unclear on the significant increase that we saw in the cost pool and assignment from the city, and the conversation that Mr. Oceanuga has been having with them about the additional financial support that they will provide in the years that we have a shortfall. We're looking at a huge increase that will have to be borne by those fees. And so if we see 50, 60, 70, 80% increases in the cost pool every year, that is going to significantly impact our ability to do what we need to do. So I'm not sure how we're going to manage that, given the city saying on the back end then they're not going to provide any support. And I'm curious whether these increases corresponded with the time frame where they said they wouldn't provide additional budgeting support. That may be a question you can't answer. So that's one of my concerns.
Mr. Oceanuga, would you like to chime in on this at this point?
I think Board Member Connor, you were still speaking, but it looked like she went on mute maybe, or I saw her mouth moving, but I didn't hear her voice. So yeah, we can't hear you. You might be on mute. Oh, she's not on mute.
Did you hear her at all?
I heard her. I heard everything up to. She was transitioning from the city saying that they weren't going to support us, and then during that transition, it dropped off. At least on my end, I didn't hear. Yeah, I still can't.
We can't hear you. We see your mouth moving, but we can't hear you. I don't know what happened, Ms. Connor. You could try it again.
Maybe trying
Still.
to.
Yeah, I don't know what
Log
happened.
off and log back on. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
you might have to log off and log back in.
And I'll
Okay.
wait for a few. Yeah, I'll wait until board member comes back and then.
Okay. Technology.
All right, so in the interim, because we're certainly going to come back to Ms. Connor as well as Mr. Oceanuga, are there any other board members that, or do we just hold on? Do we go to any other board members at this point, Cynthia?
I don't see any other hands raised, but you could until Ms. Connor gets back. Oh, Board Member Vasila just raised his hand.
I'm sorry, who raised?
Board Member Vasilas?
Ah, Mr. Vasilis. Well, you know what?
So this is, I mean,
Mr. Vasilis, I'm going to contradict myself and interrupt you for just a moment. Simply because I want to make sure that not only are you heard and that Mr. Oceanuga has an opportunity to respond to your questions. And I'm afraid with trying to do two things at once, we may lose your content. So would you mind holding on and we'll just wait until Ms. Connor
for sure.
She just logged back on. She just logged back on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vasilis. Ms. Connor, are you with us?
I am.
Okay, were you able to hear our attorney and where he was cut off from your content?
I did not. I heard him say he was going to wait for me to log back in, and then I hit leave the meeting.
Okay, but you're back now. Mr. Oceanuga, can you hear Ms. Connor clearly?
I can now. So if you don't mind, could you just repeat your question, Board Member Connor?
I don't know if it was a question, it was really a comment. I was transitioning into the question, the next item, which is how do we know how much an analyst is going to cost? We're being asked to budget $20,000 for that. Is it going to actually cost us $40,000 because the city is kicking in half?
I think that's a fantastic question. And I mean, I think I spoke, it's probably more appropriate for Fred, but I'll weigh in. I looked at the city council meeting where they passed or where they approved the contract to be signed with a third party to do the cost pool allocation analysis for the city. And that actually cost 50,000, said or around there, not to exceed 50,000. So I actually think the appropriate number would be half of that if we're going to bear half that cost. So it's probably more going to be 25 if, of course, we end up going with the same provider that they went with. Also, it wasn't during a city council meeting that contract was approved. It was actually during the Richmond Housing Authority meeting, and it was approved for the Richmond Housing Authority. So that cost allocation plan that you all see, that's you'll notice as you scroll through the pages, it starts saying City of Richmond Housing Authority. And so I don't know if that impacts the cost of the actual study because they did it for a particular agency that I don't know what size that agency is and what that looks like. So best estimates, that number might be too low, it might be too high. We tied it to the prior contract, and that's where we're at.
My last question was, I think one of the issues that we had at the last meeting was this $100,000 investment in this program did not take into account expenses for maintenance, and we were going to get some information, I thought, back from staff about what future costs for maintenance of that program might be. But I didn't see that in Mr. Tran's presentation.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't put that in specifically, but the maintenance actually would decrease because the first year the budgeted amount is higher for setup and for data conversion. So maintenance after that is approximately $36,000 on an annual basis.
My last question is and I'm sorry, Mr. Vasilis, I know I've gone on and I will stop talking, I promise, after this, at least for now. The FTE that was previously budgeted at 17, we're down to 10. Are we going back up to 17? Are there unfilled positions? What's the plan?
Sorry to clarify that. It wasn't, but our budget, that report that was issued by NBS, they use 17 FTE, which is way beyond what our program has ever budgeted. So the fact that they use that as a factor for the cost pool, we know that the allocation will be overstated by that amount because they use that to project what our future allocation should be.
So do we have any unfilled staff positions?
Currently, we do. We're still hiring for 2 analysts at this point, and those were approved in prior year's budget.
Okay, I told Mr. Vasilis I wouldn't say anything else, but I want to circle back to this because that's a concern.
You can go ahead if you want.
Oh, I appreciate that. I guess my concern here is, do we need these other 2 positions, even though they've been previously allocated? I mean, we've coming out of a pandemic. We're talking about an extra $120,000 in the budget this year. Maybe that's someplace we need to revisit. Maybe, and I don't know if that's Deputy Director Tran or Executive
That's
Director.
probably more. That's probably
Trailer. Yes.
So we over the last several fiscal years, we've been at 12 FTEs. That's been what we need to operate our program. We do need those 2 additional staff. In fact, I've been counseling, Fred has been counseling. I've had other staff having to do counseling because we've been down 2 counselors. And it puts a tremendous amount of staff on the 1 counselor that we do have. So that is pretty much something that I would not recommend or advise in terms of cutting those key positions. Well, what I think was trying to be explained is that the NBS report incorrectly stated our FTEs. I don't know whether they were using housing authorities numbers or some other numbers. They did not consult with us. They didn't. We don't know how they came up with that 17 number, but it has nothing to do with us. That said, the 12 staff that we are budgeted for are very necessary in order to operate our program. If we were to cut, that would have a significant impact on our ability to properly provide the services that we do.
I appreciate that. I just think that we're going to have to think about other ways where we can save on costs. I mean, people are always expensive, and that's not a slam. People do the jobs, but given the structure of the law and the way the program is funded, there's an optical issue when fees keep going up and the owners are bearing that burden. We want to be transparent, and we also want to be fiscally responsible. So I think we need to at least look into other areas where we can save.
Sure. I
promise I'm done now, Board Member Blessings.
So I guess I'm still a little confused, and I'll just go back to the thing I brought up one of the last meetings is if Measure L states that we're a completely independent board, why are we on the hook for the city's costs that are so exorbitant? And are we double paying for stuff? Do we have the ability to be completely independent and cover whatever we need to? I mean, that's how the law was written. It just seems like a one-way street now where the city says, oh, you can't take anything from us, right? But on the other hand, we're going to start charging you like these crazy costs. I really don't understand what's going on.
It is a problematic issue, and it creates instability for our program if the city is drastically increasing their costs. And it's also pretty clear that these numbers need very close scrubbing and scrutiny, which is what Fred has been focusing most of his time on, looking at every line on, for example, fleet. They were trying to charge us for fleet services. We don't have any fleet. We don't have vehicles, so we had to go very carefully through all the line items and scratch out the ones that we didn't think were appropriate. The idea, what was presented in this presentation, is that during this fiscal year, we will use essentially a placeholder of last year's numbers plus an escalating factor for inflation. And during that fiscal year, we will work with the city and the consultant to come up with a methodology that aligns with Government Code 50076, which requires that fees tied to any regulatory activity be actual costs or based on this. So, we had some very in-depth meetings with the city about this, and this is the interim solution. In fact, after coming up with that interim solution, we were prepared to come back to the board with a budget that would have been very similar to the original budget that we presented back in April. And then we were hit 3 days before we were published the board packet with this incredible increase in fringe benefit costs, which then put it right back where it was, in terms of the rental housing fee increase. So we are still working right now also with the city. It's not 100% certain that the 78% will be the final number. We have not received full confirmation about that. And we also have not received all of the documentation and explanation as to how that they jumped from 55 in 2018 to 62 in 2019-20 and 2021 to now trying to go to 78%. So if the salary is $100,000, instead of $62,000 going to benefits, it's not going to be $78,000. So these increases are quite shocking, obviously, and we're working diligently to either get a very thorough explanation and documentation, and if we don't get that, the board does have the option of budgeting what the board feels is appropriate.
If I can just clarify just two things, or one thing and an answer a question that board member Vasalas had. The first thing, I just want to make sure that we're precise with our language when quoting the law. The Government Code 576, it doesn't require that it actually be tied to actual costs. It requires that the regulatory fee be spent in relation to the regulatory activity for which it was assessed. And the cost needs to bear a reasonable relation to what you actually incurred. Because there's many circumstances like this program, when we charge our fees, you just can't figure out, dollar for dollar, you're estimating at what's the best methodology available to you, what that cost is going to look like. So that's the state of the law. Obviously, I'm not going to go into our legal position with the city, but you all know that we've been having those conversations and trying to figure everything out. But the board member Vasalas' question in terms of independence, you're correct. In one regard, we are functionally independent. That's what the ordinance says, right? We act independent from city council, city manager, and city attorney. However, we are an integral part of the city, which means we are the city. We're city employees, our paycheck says City of Richmond, and all those things. So there are certain obligations that are tied to that, such as the unions, right? Some of our staff members are part of particular unions. Whether or not we like it, it's where we are the city in that regards. Our benefits, CalPERS, those are all going to be tied to the city writ large. And so some of those costs, I think, are more difficult to battle with. I agree, we should be scrutinizing costs generally and asking for the bases. And that's what we've been doing. And I think the city understands. After we spoke with them, after reading some of the things that I sent to them, I think their position is, okay, let's fix this. But they have expressed, and I will share with you all, that the more you separate your fiscal independence from the city, the more costs you might actually have to bear in the short term. And just for instance, your general liability insurance, if you had a separate general liability insurance, which I don't even think you can do, but we're figuring that out. But let's just assume that you could, just on your X amount of employees. Again, their City of Richmond employees are not any different from any other employees. But if you're able to do that, there's a deductible that's tied to that. And the deductible is typically per claim. So if you face 3 lawsuits, and let's just say your deductible of $500K, well, that's $1.5 million that you potentially have to spend out of pocket before the insurance kicks in and pays the difference. So if you have 3 lawsuits and you lose or you settle for $499,000 per lawsuit, that's all out of pocket rent board expenses. Whereas if you're with the city and it's one whole insurance, that calculation might look a little different. So the conversation is nuanced, is very fluid. I think the city has approached it. They have a new city attorney. I think the prior city attorney was great as well, but this new city attorney has come in and he's approached it with clear eyes. And we're trying to reach a solution that allows for us to, yes, bring ourselves more in line with Government Code 576 and other local ordinances, and at the same time, secure fiscal viability for the future, where we're just not being crushed by costs, either by our own doing or by the city levying these costs again on us.
Yeah, I mean, that all makes sense. I mean, the general liability makes sense and all that. But it just seems there's a little bit of like, the lack of clarity and perhaps some commingling. And then when I bring up like the reserves, it's like, if we're part of the city, do other parts of the city have their own reserves? Like we have our own reserves? And it seems like, if we're sharing that liability insurance with the city, it just seems like it should be a city thing, not just a rent department that's on the hook for the deductible. It just like, how does that all play out? And I keep going back to the reserves. It seems to me it's like, if we can take from the city when we have emergencies, like why not that be the reserves rather than the 1.8 million that we've got? It just seems like we're independent, but we're not. We're sharing certain things, and that's all adding up to like a really high cost.
Right. I think the departments that are special revenue funds like ours, they do have reserves, or they did have reserves. Right. I think the RHA at some point had reserves, not anymore. The port at some point had reserves, not anymore. I think the planning and building department, which is also special revenue funds, may have reserves. I'm unclear, but just as a general principle, the city can charge and we should pay for costs that the city has incurred due to the performance of the rent board's regulatory activity, right? So whenever we call IT, hey, and we have a lot of IT issues. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we proposed a database, because the track it is pretty archaic and it has just so many issues. We call IT, that's money spent in terms of time from a different department that's not really related to our department, but they're performing a regulatory activity on behalf of our department by assisting us and doing whatever we're doing, tracking or sending out invoices or whatever that might be. And that principle is far and wide wherever it applies, but there's obvious positions it's not going to, departments that it doesn't apply. And we're obviously trying to carve that out and have those conversations and see what makes the most sense. And in terms of the reserves and having the general fund be your reserve, we hired Kevin Harper, I think at the city's encouragement and the board's encouragement. I think board member Maddock was the chair at that time. And the board decided to go with his recommendation, which he strongly recommended that we had a reserve at 17 or 18%, I don't remember. But ultimately it's a policy, a sound policy, but the board can change its policy however it sees fit.
I mean, I would just see it as, if we do see this situation being hopefully like some sort of temporary thing that needs to be worked through, that's what I would think would be a good use of reserves, to kind of keep some stability and consistency with the rates, so we're not just spiking up, 20% or whatnot in 1 year as we figure it out, because that's a lot. I mean, we've seen the charts and whatnot, but I think anything over 250, it's probably the highest fee in the nation, I would imagine. Definitely the state, it's up there. And this is Richmond. It's not, like San Francisco or even Berkeley. So that's a lot of money. So we got to be really conscious about that and, try and make some concessions wherever we can. That's all for me.
Thank you. Any other board members wish to make a comment or question?
Well, we do have a public speaker, if not.
Very good. In that case, please call the public speaker.
Okay, Ms. Alana Clark, I'm going to unmute you.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You may go ahead.
All right. My first point is kind of a small thing, but something to look at. I understand the rent board the rent board staff is asking for money to pay interpreters, phone interpreters, like through AT&T or some other such service. I personally think that's a great idea. I've used them a lot as a nurse for end of life issues and a lot of really complicated discussions. And use them very successfully. However, you're already paying for bilingual staff. You're paying them extra for being bilingual. I'm not advocating necessarily that you cut their pay, but you might want to look at that and not raise their pay until their cohorts are even with them, since you're now paying extra for this other service. I also want to point out that I don't think it's been mentioned, perhaps for political reasons, but since I'm not part of y'all, I can say that the larger the budget, the larger the salary that is defensible for our staff, particularly Nick, to mandate or ask for himself. And so there is an economic incentive for him to make the budget as big as possible. Lastly, the affordable housing fee, if you look year over year, it really shot up, especially the year that the retirement community came for help, and they took a lot of hours, and now they don't, as far as I know. So that's something that, you know, the affordable housing sector of this budget is they pay a lot of money for affordable housing, and that's crazy. I also would like the board to revisit being able to split this fee with the renters. We need to put us all in the same boat, because that's where we live. We sink and we float all together. They need us, we need them. This is actually not a us and them situation. We're all in it together, and we need to pay these fees together. All the other very expensive organizations, such as yours, allow some sharing of this fee with the renters. Thank you.
That
Thank
was
you.
the only speaker.
She was our only speaker?
He was the only and last speaker.
Okay, thank you. All righty. Now that we've heard from Ms. Clark again, let's go back to the board and see if there are any board members that wish to make a comment on this.
Chair Finley, if I may make one comment.
Of course.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it was clear, but the general liability, cost pool, workers' compensation, and admin, because those numbers are currently being discussed, we're using last year's numbers, right? That's what Fred said. However, the administration cost pool number, we are not using last year's number. We're taking what they gave us and we're just chopping out what we think doesn't apply. That number is very high still. I think it's around 200 and something thousand. If we use last year's number, that number drops down to 50 something thousand, and the fee drops down to still high, but it's around 230 for fully controlled, and 129 maybe for partially controlled, I don't remember. But the point that I want to make, 2 points, is those numbers will be, there's going to be a true up, quote unquote, which means when we actually do the study, those numbers are going to be, the real numbers are going to be reflective in the next year's budget. So if we undervalue the numbers we put in right now, we're going to be owing the city some sort of money next year. You know, if we overvalue it, then vice versa, the city will owe us some kind of offset, just so you all know. Also, and finally, this is an ongoing process. It started, I mean, it's been ongoing for years, but it really kicked up in January. We're now almost in May. And if the speed of which this has happened is any indicator, it may not be resolved, you know, in a timely fashion, or in a way where we have better insight mid-year. So all your expectations are managed. You know, we continue to reach out. The city's very busy. They have Measure U. They have various lawsuits that are happening. They're just very busy. And so they have met with us, and this issue is very important to us. And so we're very anxious to get it resolved. So we're kind of calling every day, not every day, but you can imagine we're being a little bit more aggressive in terms of how often we want to meet and discuss and get these documents. And they're trying to juggle what they have in their hands. And so I don't think this process is going to move as quickly as I hope. And I don't think it's going to be resolved for in the near future, but hopefully I'm incorrect. So.
Chair Finley, Board Member Johnson raised her hand first, and then Board Member Connor.
All right, let's go to Board Member Johnson.
So as far as splitting the cost of fees with tenants, I was told that was not legal, but the fact that the rent is possibly going up 5.2%, that should help defray the cost of the fees.
Are you finished, Ms. Johnson? Did you wish to say anything further?
No, that's it.
Okay, thank you. And then did I understand it was Ms. Connor that wished to speak?
Yes.
Mr. Ocean actually raised the point that I was going to ask is how are we going to get this budget in front of the city council in time, given the delays that we're currently experiencing?
Well, we have several options. One of the options is to hold special meetings when necessary in the month of May. So it's very likely there will be more than one meeting in May to resolve this. But we are getting closer to getting numbers that we can use. Fred can probably speak more to the timing of it because he's in the day-to-day of scrubbing through each number. But I think we're much closer in terms of a resolution with regard to the cost pool, because we're going to the plan is to use a placeholder. What is not clear or where we still have uncertainty is the fringe benefits. That is what has jacked up the fee so much than what it otherwise would be. It's not because we just want to raise the budget. It's in fact we've worked very hard over the last 3 or 4 years to keep the fee stable. In fact, we reduced the fee last year. So we do not have, it's not in our interest to have a higher budget. It's in our interest to have a stable budget. I think we'll be able to resolve this in time. We do have the month of May, and we do actually have until we have a little bit in June as well. So we're going to have to likely meet twice, if not more, in the coming months.
I have a question, if I may. The backup information that was provided to us in our report, the cost allocation that we have been given is for the fiscal use of 2021 through 2022, and it's based on the information herein is based on the actual expenditures of 2019-2020. It would seem to me that the information that we were provided is already a year old and a day late. The city council is currently working on their new budget. Why don't we have that report in front of us instead of an antiquated document?
Just to be clear, which report are you speaking about?
I'm talking about the NBS report that was attached to our package.
Chair Finley, that is correct. And the issue date on that report is January 18th, 2022. So
yes,
that's the most current report that we have available. At this point, I don't believe they've actually have moved forward to get a new report issued. So we're
how did they plan a budget without having this kind of information? I'm sorry, Fred, that's a rhetorical question, but how did they get it done?
That's why we've been requesting to speak to NBS, and we've been trying to make an effort every few days or every week, and hopefully in the next week or two we will be able to discuss with them. But unfortunately, this report is the most updated report that we do have available to us.
That has been made available to us, and I think that's the key question, because we're not dealing with reality if we're looking at a budget report that is out of date, based on information that is out of date, and I don't understand that at all.
And Chair Friendly, we raised those issues with the city, and I think and the city understands, and that's why I think that's one of the reasons why the city has why we've reached some sort of tentative understanding of paying for a new cost allocation study that its focus will be narrowed on the rent program as it relates to the city writ large. And that's why the numbers, and to kind of answer Lana's question as well, that's why those numbers, all the cost pool numbers, those three categories plus the PERS, we are uncertain what those numbers are going to be. We're not going to be able to resolve what those numbers are going to be before the end of this fiscal year. So to ensure that we have a budget in place and we have fees passed, we're using placeholder numbers from last year to estimate what the numbers would have been or are going to be the new fiscal year. And then in fiscal year 23-24, we're going to have to adjust based on what the study has said. So yeah, it's going to be quite a process, and it's going to require a lot of coordination with the city. And like Fred alluded to, we've contacted them many times. We're waiting to hear back for some of the outstanding items, and we're just going to keep trying to stay on them. But I recognize they're busy, and I don't think it's a I'm not going to say it's a bad faith effort or anything like that on their part. I think they're busy, and they have newer staff, and there's been a lot of staff turnover in some of those departments that are vital for us getting those informations.
One of the questions I also have, Charles, is that NBS made a big deal in their report about how they went to every single department and verified the basis for their decision making. Have they ever talked to people from the rent board?
No.
As part of the budgetary preparation?
No.
Okay, because that's why you get ridiculous mistakes, as in overestimating how many people actually work here. That's a pretty simple number. Let alone what they did to the other figures that make absolutely no sense, no common sense. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like we're having to make different scenarios that may in fact not work because we don't know. We just don't know, but we have to have a budget that is approved by the city council so that we can go forward with the establishment of what our fees are going to be. And that figure has got to be based on the reality of a bunch of figures that don't quite make sense. So I'm having some real thoughts about this, but I also understand that we're under the gun so that we can go forward and create a fee. But I'm concerned about the use of reserve monies, and I thought that I think that there may be some sort of a legal requirement that when you do put away reserve monies, those are not to be used for operating expenses. They're to be used for emergency expenses. Am I just wrong on that one?
No, you're correct. That just to correct the prior statement, we obviously pass our budget, and then the city council passes the fee based on our recommendation.
Yes.
But to answer your question, yeah, there is, per your own policy, the reserves can only be spent on very certain things. But the concept is a reserve cannot be used for just general revenue raising. It needs to be tied to something, and they're tied to emergency activities. And so, yeah, you can use them for one-time instances in emergencies or otherwise, and it's specified in the policy that you should all have.
Okay, so I am correct. It's not a slush fund. It is an emergency fund.
That's right.
Okay, all right.
Board member, sorry, Chair Finley, if we make a mistake by underestimating, under budgeting, it will be an emergency because we won't be able to fund the program. At least that's my understanding.
Okay, well, that's why I asked the question, Ms. Connor, because I interpreted that a little differently. I understand your use of emergency, it is, but I also am very concerned about taking a fund that was not intended to pay for salaries or
I'm
whatever
with
it
you.
was, or whatever. And
I'm totally with you on that.
But I also am aware that there have been years when our staff has foregone any raise to make sure that there was enough money to do everything. So I have a bit of a different sense of the value of staff and what they've contributed, not only in their work hours, but also in their cost of living expenses. So let us go on from there. Unless Ms. Connor, you wanted to add anything further.
No, thank you.
Okay, all righty. I think that we're getting closer to perhaps a motion. What I would like to see, if we can, Mr. Tran, is to go back to the last couple of pages that were summation pages about what's in front of us, so that we have those, we have that clarity. And it looks like, would you do the explanation again on this page?
So this first one is the option to actually still include the database for the 100,000 amount. With this, the first option, if the fringe benefits remain at the new rate that the finance department inputted at 78% for fringe benefits, it'd be $3.6 million operating budget with fully covered units at a fee of $266 and partially covered units at $149. If the fringe benefit rate decreases to the 62%, which was what they used prior years, the operating budget would be $3.3 million. Fully covered unit fee would be $248. Partially covered units would be $139. The other two scenarios is without the database, so we're reducing it by $100,000. The first scenario is the 78% fringe benefits with an operating budget of rounded up $3.5 million. Fees would be $257 for fully covered units, $145 for partially covered units. If the fringe rate would go to the 62%, the operating budget would be $3.2 million. Fully covered units would be at a fee of $239 and partially covered units would be at $135.
I see. I see. So that's the difference then in the two pages. The first page has the new automation, the new program. The last page 10 does not.
Correct. And we did, just to clarify, we did input the $20,000 for the cost allocation consultant, because that is something we feel would be required regardless of what scenarios are presented.
Okay. Any further comments from either staff or board members? Would anyone like to make a motion? Do you have enough information in front of you to make the motion, or at least what's available to us?
Might be helpful to go to the recommended action page, just so at least that's the starting point.
All right, Mr. Traylor?
Yes, so this could be a starting point. Of course, the board can make any motion that they wish.
For staff's sake, I heard a lot of comments from the board members, various comments. If you want to add them into the motion, just be clear about it. I think one comment was to look at where cost savings can be had, particularly unfilled positions. The other comment was to look at reserves. There's been a lot of comments, so whatever your motion is, please just as clear as possible.
I'm sorry, you mentioned the unfilled positions. What was the other thing that you mentioned?
I think one was reserves. I think board member Connor spoke about the unfilled positions, and board member Vasalas spoke about the reserves and the general fund. I'm not really clear, but I mean, he can speak for himself. And I just want to make sure whatever motion comes out of this, staff knows precisely what it is to bring back. I think board member Connor mentioned from the last meeting that she asked for us to look at the ongoing cost of a database, if that were to be included. I'm not sure if that was, I'm not sure if that was filtered through. So just to make sure those points are caught.
Okay.
I move that because this would be to accept the updated fiscal year budget, right? Would be that item.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to tell staff what to do regarding the updated budget. We're going to, we gave them directions the last time, but we have a different set of givens now. So now we're going to have to say, okay, we'd like you to prepare the budget for our approval so that we can send it to the city council, but with this new information taken into consideration, which we didn't have in front of us the last time.
I'm sorry, I thought the way that would work is that I would move to accept the presentation, and then if anybody wanted to make any sort of amendments to my motion, they could.
You don't have to move to receive it. You don't have to make a motion on that. It's
okay.
Been received. But yeah, your motion would be related to directing us what to come back with,
And if you look at page 11, we're receiving the budget study that we have thus far. But I believe it's with staffs regarding budget options in consideration of the interim solution of using last year's fiscal cost pool numbers adjusted for inflation and additional research. Budgeting for a consultant to assist with the cost pool methodology analysis to align with Government Code 50076, and in consideration of a probable significant increase in fringe benefit costs for fiscal year 22-23. I'm a little confused there because I thought that when we were looking at the options on the other two pages, one of the options said that it was that we were adding a specific amount. Oh, okay. So you're saying in consideration of. I don't quite know what that means, Charles. That last phrase.
Well, I didn't write it, but
I can explain.
I'm imagining it's the difference between the 80% and the 62%. I think we're asking, choose a percentage you would like us to budget.
Okay, all righty. And Mr. Taylor, was that the meaning there?
Yes, that's exactly the meaning.
Okay. And that. And those two figures were 80% and what, 62%?
Actually, it's 78% and 62%.
78 and 62%. And those are the costs of the fringe benefits.
Correct. And
Potential costs.
in the finance department, they're getting closer to validating the confirmation of the 78%. They haven't completely validated it at this point, but they're much closer to confirming that with us.
But I have to ask Fred, based on what?
Yeah, they emailed me this afternoon stating that they would still get back to me, and they're much closer. With the fringe, it's since it's, say for instance, health insurance and retirement benefits, it's more based on rates. So it's based on the employees, what plans are in, as well as what CalPERS plan they belong to. So the rate is actually less difficult to establish. So them getting closer to that 78%, more likely it is a closer reality. That the cost pool for the admin charges will definitely take more time and require additional research and meeting with the consultants. But the fringe benefits, that 78% that they did come up with, there was a change in some methodology from prior year, but their amounts appear to be closer to what actuals would be.
And yet, Fred, so much of any accounting process, and goodness knows I don't mean to preach to you on this, is how do you bunch together your figures? I mean, certainly there would be a higher cost for fire and police services than there would be for costs for people that are basically in-house, not in danger, not solving violent crime and what have you. But if they just push it all together, then that cost might be 78%. But I cannot believe that we're seeing a cost that for the types of employment that we provide and services that we provide that could possibly have a 78% fringe cost. That just doesn't make any sense.
Chair Finley, the pooling of the cost is what causes the little guy to pay more to help offset the expenses of the big guy. So, you know, I think what Board Member Vasilas was saying is it feels like we're in a one-way relationship with the city where they want us to help offset the expenses, but they don't want to help us out in a time where we might be in need. But because they are pooling the expenses, the way it gets divided, unfortunately, means that those people who don't have claims are paying for other people who do. So even in those NBS numbers, you know, I saw there was a couple of workers' compensation claims in our department, and we're small. So if we have 2 claims, that's 20% of our staff, or whatever that multiplication is. I'll let Fred correct me later. But you know, if you have 100 staff members and 2 people file a workers' comp claim, it's not as impactful. But because we're sharing the expenses, it doesn't matter. So I would be prepared to present a proposal for a motion. Essentially, I would suggest that we follow Mr. Tran's proposal at the 78% without the database, with instructions to the staff to find some other cost savings, whether it is not filling those unfilled positions this year. I'm sorry, Mr. Traylor, I know that it's really important, but because we do not have any control over these cost pool costs or these fringe benefits costs, it seems it might be irresponsible for us to hire more people when we don't know how much it's going to cost to keep them on board. So my proposal or my motion would be to accept Mr. Tran's calculations, I think on page 10. Is that without Mr. Tran? I'm sorry. Nope. There we go.
Sorry.
That's okay. So this option B at 78%, with the hopes that we can find the cost savings if we maybe delete 2 of those those unfilled staff, so that we can get these costs per unit cost down. That would be my proposal. And hopefully that's clear enough, and Mr. Oceanuga will tell me whether it is or not.
So that was a motion? Was that a motion?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
I was wondering if that was I saw you talking.
That sounded like a motion, pretty close.
Okay. Board Chair Finley, Vice Chair Mishek has her hand up.
Ms. Mishek.
So at this point, would we discuss the motion on the floor, or would we vote on this motion that Board Member Connor just
It
proposed?
hasn't been seconded yet, so.
So I wait for a second, correct? Before we
Or it dies without a second.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Oceanuga, I should let you do that.
No, that was great.
Do we have a second though?
I'll second it.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. May we have a vote, please?
Oh, I think.
Okay, did you want to?
discussion before a
Oh,
vote,
you
right?
want to just. Normally, the discussion would precede well, no, okay, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and discuss it.
I'm sorry, do we not, I thought that was the procedure, is once you have a motion on the floor, then discussion ensues.
Well, that's what I thought too, but all right, then let's. Mr. Oceanuga, are we correct? Once you have a motion in a second, you go ahead and vote?
Yeah, I think it's fine to have a discussion right now prior to the vote, especially because that's what was indicated to Vice Chair Mishek, and it'd be terrible for her to lose her ability to speak about a motion, so.
I'll withdraw
Okay.
my second for the time being then.
Okay.
All right.
There you go.
I'm sorry, I'm basing it on how City Council does it. I'm sorry, they usually discuss
No,
it.
and that was my understanding as well. But since Mr. Vasilis was kind enough to withdraw his second, let's go ahead with the discussion.
Thank you. So, sorry to mess up procedure. I want to strongly oppose that I think I want to strongly oppose any sort of doing any cost-cutting measures around staffing in particular. I think there's no sense in trying to keep the viability of a program going if the program doesn't have sufficient staff to keep the program going, right? And so we're hearing pretty clearly from Nick that they're super understaffed, that, if you want to think about the financial feasibility of the program, we're paying Nick in his director capacity to provide counseling services. So that is actually not a really good use of his salary, right? And also with Fred Tran. And also, if we're talking about, I brought this point up last time, but I think it bears repeating, across the city, whether we're talking about in the rent program or otherwise, we're seeing incredibly low morale and low retention rates of city staff because these positions aren't being filled even when they're budgeted for. So I think that we should, and especially if we're talking about 2 counselor positions, which aren't huge positions in terms of salaries, I don't think that should be the way to go. It doesn't sound like we're particularly financially strapped. It sounds like we have to make an investment in the program. In the meanwhile, it sounds like city staff and the city manager are unfairly shoving some of the city's costs onto us, which I think is something that it doesn't sound like this discussion is dead in the water for the rent program. It seems as if there are different avenues before we for sure even have to do this cost pool, right? So to start already slashing at the infrastructure of our program before the situation is even resolved, when we have 2 months until the budget is passed, there are other avenues to go. So, but I'll finish by saying I'm hearing pretty clearly that we're paying our director and deputy director to perform counseling services, which to me makes no financial sense. But it also makes sense that they have to do that if they are not properly staffed. So I think this is a citywide problem, and I don't think the way to do it is to just work the people actually running the program to the bone. That doesn't make sense to me at all.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Anyone else have comments?
Yeah, Board Member Johnson.
Ms. Johnson?
So I actually agree with Vice Chair Mishak 100%. And just to clarify, are there 10 staff members or 12?
There are currently 10 that are filled, but we have 2 unfilled positions. And we're actually in the process of starting the interview process in the coming weeks. I can tell you that when you stress out, the staff resources, it also increases the chances of lawsuits and workers' comp, and it's just generally a really bad idea. But it's the philosophy that has been used by the city of Richmond for a very long time. Tap into reserves and cut staff. And those two things, sometimes it's necessary to tap into reserves if you really have to, if it's an emergency. But in fact, some of the recommendations we've received from the city was to do exactly those two things, to adjust our budget to their increased costs. So it's very problematic, in my view, to start cutting key staff, and counselor positions especially are the bread and butter positions for the agency. They're the ones that do the day-to-day work of counseling landlords and tenants on their rights and responsibilities. They do mediations, they do their workshops. They are the core of our staff. So cutting them would be very problematic. I understand sometimes you got to do what you got to do to survive, but it would be a very big impact on our program. There may be other areas where we can look at savings, and there may be, the board can always look at adjusting and stabilizing the budget this year by looking at the reserve. But I think that is also potentially problematic, because once you start tinkering with the reserve, then it becomes a regular activity on an annual basis of, well, we're short, so let's just tap into the reserve. And that's, I think, also problematic. So I think what we're trying to do is establish a long-term plan for stabilizing these costs that we don't have control over, or that we historically haven't had very much control over: cost pool and fringe benefits. And they've been increasing at an outrageous amount. And if you really think about it also, the departments that are most impacted by these increases are not general fund programs. They are special revenue programs that make money or bring in money or are self-funding. Because when you take the money that landlords pay to fund this program and you increase the cost pool, or you increase other benefit costs, that goes straight into the general fund. And we, as Board Member Connor mentioned, that becomes a one-way relationship where the costs increase for us, in a way that we can't control, but we can't access the general fund. So I have a lot of issues with the idea of cutting staff, and I also have a lot of issues with the idea of not appropriately paying staff. And as I think all the board members know, senior staff, including myself, forgone salary adjustments for the last 3 years. And we've lost some key people in part because of the way that the current employment market is. It's just very difficult to retain staff.
Chair Finley, Board Member Connor has her hand up.
I'm sorry. Board Member Connor?
She has her
Yes,
hand.
please. Ms. Connor?
So Executive Director Traylor, I fully understand the challenge with not filling unfilled positions. what are some suggestions do you have that we can consider for other cost-cutting measures in light of our desire to not leave you personing the counter, and also not borrowing money from the general fund from the city or tapping into our reserves? What are the alternatives?
Well, the vast majority of our costs are salary related. At least between 60 80%. I think it's closer to 80% now. And so there aren't a whole lot of costs that can be cut, other than we could cut some mailing costs, we could cut some outreach costs, but those are relatively small costs in terms of the budget. So we can defer hiring, like you said. That is something we can do to build up our reserves more. But if we have a reserve that we're not going to, be able to access unless it's an emergency, then that really kind of all you do is you build the reserves and don't really have much to show for in terms of day-to-day resources. So I don't have an answer to your question. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer off the top of my head. I think obviously we can cut the database. That's why we put that there. But this is a difficult pill to swallow for the board and for the program, and for landlords who have to pay these fees. So I understand it's difficult. But I'm sorry, I've said enough. Board member, Vice Chair Mishek has some.
Yes, she has her hand up. Chair Finley, Vice Chairman Mishek has her hand up.
Ms. Mishek?
So I'm sort of curious. I mean, maybe this is just a philosophical difference, but I'm sort of curious why we're at the stage right now where the priority is examining cutting costs to the program. I don't really understand that. Like, I understand that what the city is proposing around cost sharing is a huge burden. I understand that. But I'm not seeing in what we're proposing. I mean, and maybe it's the difference in board members thinking that what the fees are for landlords are overly burdensome. Maybe that's where the sticking point is. But in terms of actually starting to cut the program, it seems a little bit premature. We're still not at the point where we've resolved with the city what this cost sharing is. It sounds like there's a case to be made that we're not going to have to do that. I understand there's recourse where we could go to city council about it. And then there's also always going to city council and asking to reinstate the reimbursement agreement with the city. So to me, to kind of like hobble the program out of a sense of panic that at some point in the future, we may not be financially feasible when we're in the beginning stages of dealing with this issue seems a little bit premature to me. We're also, I mean, we've talked about and saw how, no offense, rent program, but how archaic the IT infrastructure is. We're overly reliant on the city's IT department, which is again, understaffed, and those positions aren't being filled. So to me, it seems like more the issue right now is going to the city and asking for these things to be addressed, which I understand staff is trying to do, versus beginning to slash away. And to Board Member Johnson's point, we are implementing a significant, if we're tying rent increases to the cost of living is exponential right now. Rents are going to be higher. The fee is not an overly burdensome increase, in my opinion. And I know that there's differing opinions there, but I think this discussion feels premature to me.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Board Member Vasilis has his hand up.
Mr. Vasilis?
You're mute.
I mean, just some perspective that I've been trying to provide is, most of these proposed rates would put us at the highest rate in the state, maybe the nation, and we have the lowest median rent amounts in the state. So you have the highest and the lowest. And, from a community perspective of someone who deals with this on a day-to-day and is, in a network of hundreds of small landlords, this is huge. This will be the highest fee in the state. So let's be considerate of that. I mean, the raise from last year to what's proposed here would be higher than my allowable raise on one unit. So it's not a small amount. So when you look at like a $3,000 per month rent, and you talk about 5%, that's a lot. On $950, that's not so much. So just to be conscious of where we're at, we can't just pick and choose numbers as we see fit to try and, rationalize. That's all.
Anyone else? Oh, thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Connor, do you want to bring back your motion, or are you going to just let that rest?
Nope, I'm bringing it back. I still think we don't have a lot of options, given all of the unknowns that we're dealing with. And we don't have the ability to go borrow money from the city anymore. And paying salaries that we aren't currently paying, I don't think is an emergency. So I know it's not popular, but I think we need to defer hiring at least until we can better figure out what's happening with our budget. So that's would be my proposal, is to adopt option B with the 78% fringe, counting for the 20% for the consultant, and defer the hiring of those 2 unfilled positions temporarily. That's my motion.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
All right. It's been
Can I ask a
moved and
question?
seconded.
Can I ask a question? What did we do with the first one? So the first one is she still, this is still the first motion, and then because Board Member Vasilis withdrew the first, withdrew his second. So is this a new motion?
Same motion. It's intended to be the same motion.
Okay. Okay.
All right, but now we do have a second.
Yes.
May we have a vote? Pardon me?
Nothing, I said, so he brought it back.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Board
May we?
A vote?
Yes.
Board Member Connor,
Yes.
Board Member Johnson,
No.
Board Member Vasilis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Mishek,
No.
Chair Finley.
No.
Motion not passed.
Okay.
Motion fails, I mean.
Thank you. Vice Chair Mishek, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, but where should I refer to the wording? What wording do I refer to here?
Well, are you going with the 78% or are you going with the 62%? In terms of the fringes, we're looking at,
Okay,
and
yeah.
are you trying to include the database or not include the database?
Yeah, so I'll make a motion that staff come back with the 78% fringe option, including the database.
Including the database now. And you are, just for clarification, this is not part of the motion, but you are definitely dropping the issue of the unfilled positions. Is that correct?
Dropping the issue, yes. So I think I am not asking staff to come back with a budget, not including the 2 unfilled positions.
Okay, all right.
So the budget, the motion I'm making should include, the budget should include for 12 staff positions.
All right, and the database.
And the database, yes.
All right, and the 78% fringe up.
Yes.
Okay, Is that clear, everyone? All right. May we have a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
All right. We have a motion and a second. May we have a vote, please?
Board Member Connor,
No.
Board Member Johnson,
Yes.
Board Member Vassilos,
No.
Vice Chairman Check,
Yes.
Chair Finley.
Yes.
Motion passes with Board Member Connor and Board Member Vassilos voting no.
Okay, thank you.
The next item on the agenda is reports of officers.
Oh, so funny that we were just talking about staffing. We are in the process of recruiting our new rent program services analysts. We're very excited about this process, and we have a very good list this time around. And we expect to be interviewing these folks in the next couple of weeks. Other than that, we do have a workshop coming up. Cindy, do you have the exact date? It's on how to file a rent adjustment petition.
Oh, and I don't have that data.
Sorry. Okay, sorry about that.
Sorry.
I think it's.
But I can look it up.
Yeah, why don't we do that real quick?
Okay.
So other than that, what I will say, just from perspective of the executive director, I will be working very closely with Deputy Director Tran to scrub these numbers to make sure that whatever numbers the city gives us are thoroughly analyzed, and any documentation that's necessary to back up their request is provided. I also appreciate the board's robust discussion on this matter, and hope everyone has a good evening.
And
The
April,
workshop is on April 29th.
Thank you.
Mr. Tran, did you have something you wish to add?
I was just gonna say it's on the 29th.
Okay. Any further?
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, this meeting is adjourned at 7:13.
Thank you.